Welcome to The Grit Factor, reimagining grit as part of the whole person in a life that matters. I'm your host, Shannon Huffman Polson.
I started out in the third class of women to enter the Coast Guard Academy. And therefore, as one of those first, I could never outrun it, which was okay. I got used to that.
Sure.
But it's something important for people to remember is that you can't just jump over people ahead of you when you're in military or anything else where you're getting promoted based on your experience and your time in the job.
Yes.
So it takes 30 years to get somebody, or 28, from an ensign to an admiral, or from a second lieutenant to a general in the Air Force, Marines. And you can't get out of line. So it took a generation for women to start getting up into the executive levels. And people want action faster. Why can't we have more women, more minorities at the top of the military? Well, it takes 30 years to grow one.
Sure. So
I think now, of course, nowadays, people are looking at lateral entry. How can you bring people in direct commission to get more specialty expertise in there at the mid-grade maybe, and let people rise up faster? So not just diversity of skin color and gender, but diversity of experience. So taking people that have technical experience and bring them in direct at a mid-grade level maybe, or an executive level even, is a way to improve the service's capability in all respects.
Well, that's actually a really important point as well. And I think one that gets brought up on occasion with questions of diversity and inclusion is really looking at diversity from a much broader lens, right? Diversity really is about different experience and different perspectives, and as well as race and gender, right? So it's all of those things.
I've got it's in my book, and I've got a series of blogs on different kinds of diversity. And to me, there are three kinds of diversity. There's the demographic, which is obvious, but unfortunately, the only thing people think about when they think about diversity, and that divides our society into black and white and men and women. Why would you want that? Why not add a second kind of diversity, experiential? And this is maybe your religion, maybe it's where you're from, it's what you do. You're a carpenter, or you're a civil engineer, you're an actor or a mathematician. And then the third kind of diversity is cognitive. Maybe that's all about your personality and how you think. Are you an extrovert or an introvert? Are you creative, or are you kind of like technical, structured? And those kinds of diversity really are what make a difference on a team. It's the cognitive and the experiential diversity.
Right. Absolutely. No, that's so important. And I like hearing how you break that out into three different categories to consider all of them. I mean, they're really critical. But the other thing that came up as you were describing your career is within the context of that diversity. And this is when we talk about diversity and inclusion, right? It's one thing to hire for usually just one of those categories, unfortunately, but let's say you're even hiring for all three of those categories. But to change a system in a way that actually takes those different perspectives into account in decision-making, and then to make that diverse team work well together towards a shared purpose, that's where leadership really comes into play. And where have you seen that done well, maybe from your own experience or from somewhere else, where we're able to actually include those diverse perspectives and then bring them together in pursuit of a shared purpose?
Where I've seen it work the absolute best, and it's unfortunate because it doesn't translate as well to business, is on a ship.
Oh, okay.
You might have seen it in an air wing when you were in the Air Force with your being a pilot, and your pointy end of the spear positions, because you do have a really shared purpose where your lives are in each other's hands. And the life of the team, the life of the ship is on the watchstanders when they're on the bridge of the ship or in the engine room. So I think being on an operational unit like a ship, you see the diversity really appreciated, because you're out there on your own at sea. And I could say the same for your profession as an aviator. And there's no one there but you. And of course, if a plane breaks down, it falls out of the sky. But ships, we break down on the water all the time. Not all the time, but often enough. And you've got to have people looking at different ways of doing business to find out how you can fix this problem. You're out there, you got to get it fixed. Or you're into an operation that's really crazy. Maybe you're approaching you've discovered a boat filled with migrants. It's overflowing. It's going to sink, and they're all going to die unless you can get in there with a creative solution to how to rescue them and bring them back on board your ship. And I found that all these problems you face at sea when you're doing these missions where there's no drill card or rule book for it, it goes to the experience and the way of thinking of the different crew members, to come together as that team at sea where there's no one else to count on, just you, with an incredibly important mission where each other's lives and safety are at stake. You depend on each other fully. So I think that really helps to include every voice, because you can't afford not to. So in a corporate environment, maybe where you don't have that sense of urgency and those constraints, where you have a controlled environment more, it really is maybe more, well, even on the ship, there's a lot of leadership, don't get me wrong, because you can shut down a crew if you're not a good captain or executive officer. Right. But I think in a boardroom, you've really got to stretch to make sure everyone's included, because all those voices around the conference table aren't heard. Sometimes the quiet voices who are afraid to raise their hand for whatever reason, they're just the introverts. They might have the best ideas, and no corporation can afford to leave value sitting on the sidelines or at the end of the table. Absolutely. So leaders have to learn how to deliberately seek out the voices at the table, and they might have to call on people. Don't just let the senior person present the argument and you've got the table filled with, or the Zoom call filled with other faces that have supported the effort but never have a voice. So a good leader will call on different people and ask them what they think, and then they will make sure they acknowledge that feedback and not just skim over it, and make that person feel valued who's given that, and stoke their confidence, so that maybe next time they'll actually raise their hand and jump in, right? Absolutely. So then you create a more inclusive culture by welcoming people at first. They might have to reach out and welcome them, but then you finally have a culture that's percolating and people are all feeling comfortable to step in and give their point of view without having to wait and be asked.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I feel like in the corporate world and the business side of things, the places that I've seen that come closest to some of these are examples, are product launches. And when a technology company comes together for a product launch, obviously it's a very different thing, but there's a real sense of intensity and urgency, and you've got to make these disparate parts come together with marketing and engineering and operations, and there's a real tension and urgency and a lot of sleepless nights that happen around those product launches, and sometimes in the R&D pipeline as well. So there definitely are some places where I think the corporate world could take some of these learnings to say, hey, do you have a diverse team offering diverse perspectives? Are you getting different perspectives that will help you with your sales channels or with that marketing? Because at the end of the day, if all the people look the same, you're only marketing to one group of people, and you just can't afford to do that anymore. You simply can't afford it, right? In this kind of environment. So
you can't, and you shouldn't be interested in that. You should be looking for as much difference as you can get, various opinions and perspectives, so that you can get something, a product that appeals to the broader society. And I know there's market research that does that too, but you can't just rest your laurels on the market research. You've got to have the people in your organization that also represent the customers that you're serving.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're just tailoring your diversity program for what you think you need to do to get away with it and check that box. It needs to be a culture, a corporate culture. And that's where it becomes harder, because you have people sitting in the back room, sitting at home nowadays without, and just maybe a Zoom. And then there's Zooms where they don't even, or web meetings where they don't even make you turn your camera on. So you're voiceless and you're faceless sometimes. Yes. So a good leader has to find a way to cut through all that, create a sense of purpose. And to get back to that example, maybe you have people turn their cameras on so that they are part of the included group and not checked out in a dark box.
Absolutely.
A good leader has to look at all this.
Yes. Yes. I actually have been looking for these examples as I've been traveling again on the road in the last 6 months or so. And I remember 2 examples come to mind that really struck me. And one was actually not a work trip. It was a family trip, but we stopped by on a road trip to Mod Pizza, and it's just a pizza place, right? Where you pick up a quick slice of pizza. I have 2 little boys, and so they are big fans of pizza on the road. And up on the wall, they had a purpose statement on the wall. And essentially it was something along the lines of, we exist to serve. I was like, you know what? How great is that? You've got a bunch of people in an environment where often people aren't being paid enough. They don't have enough benefits. There is a really hard environment for staffing, and they have their purpose displayed on the wall. No wonder they're doing so well, because that's part of a leadership cultural development, is to say, what's our purpose and how are we going to display that? And the second one that did come from a recent client was Zimmer Biomet in Indiana, and they make orthopedic parts like shoulders and knees and hips and things that I will certainly have in the next 10 to 20 years. And up on their wall, and actually at all of their workstations in their plant, they have a saying up that says, consider that this might be going into one of your family members. Something said a little bit better than that. But I'm like, that is a purpose, right? That's something that's going to remind you that your quality better be so good. It might be going in your mom, your dad, right? And so I love those examples of how people say, in the midst of all of this, how do we bring a diverse team together towards a common goal in the midst of challenges? And part of it is by stating and putting into that culture that sense of purpose. So I love that you've brought that up a couple of times. And I think you're right. That does cut through a lot of the chaff.
You can find Sandra at sandrastosz.com. That's Sandra, STOSZ.com, as well as on LinkedIn and Twitter. And pick up her book, Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass, Leading in Uncharted Waters, anywhere books are sold. Thanks for listening to The Grit Factor. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend. Also, pick up your own copy of The Grit Factor for more candid stories and lessons from leaders in the vanguards of their fields. And invest in yourself and in your team with learning journeys in grit, leadership, purpose, and storytelling at thegritinstitute.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll join me for the next episode of The Grit Factor.